I call this meeting of the Upshur County Commission to order. We'll begin with a moment of silent meditation followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Amen.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning, everyone. Would you like to read the minutes from last meeting?
The County Commission of Upshur County, West Virginia held a regular meeting at the courthouse annex on Thursday, October 9, 2014 at 9 a.m. J.C. Rafferty called the meeting to order. There were present J.C. Rafferty, Commissioner, Donnie Tenney, Commissioner, Troy Brady, Commissioner, Kelly Cunningham, County Administrator, Carrie Wallace, Assistant County Administrator, and Tony Newman, Secretary. The meeting began with a moment of silent meditation and prayer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. All motions passed unanimously unless otherwise stated. After reading of the minutes, on motion by Donnie Tenney, seconded by Troy Brady, the Commission approved the regular meeting minutes of October 2, 2014 as submitted. After discussion, on motion by Donnie Tenney, seconded by Troy Brady, the Commission approved the employment of Tri-County Child Exchange Monitor Nisa Brown, effective October 13, 2014 at $7.55 per hour. After discussion, on motion by Donnie Tenney, seconded by Troy Brady, the Commission approved the resignation of Tina McHenry, Legal Assistant to the Prosecuting Attorney, effective October 3, 2014. After discussion, on motion by Donnie Tenney, seconded by Troy Brady, the Commission approved the advertisement for a full-time legal assistant to the prosecuting attorney. Applications will be accepted until close of business on October 24, 2014. After discussion, on motion by Donnie Tenney, seconded by Troy Brady, the Commission approved and authorized the Commission to sign the letter requesting the Environmental Protection Agency to hold public hearings on the Clean Power Plan in various locations in West Virginia. After discussion, on motion by Donnie Tenney, seconded by Troy Brady, the Commission approved and authorized the Commission to sign the letters to Trent and Travis Davison requesting the cleanup of their safe sites and structures property by November 6, 2014. Both letters will be delivered by Marion County Process Server. J.C. Rafferty reviewed the following for your information items. Correspondence from Susan O'Connell, Division of Public Transportation, concerning a public meeting to update the Coordinated Public Transit Human Services Transportation Plan. The update is necessary due to the impact that recent federal legislation has had on Federal Transit Administration grant programs. The meeting will be held October 15, 2014 from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. at the Randolph County Senior Center. Correspondence from Roy Wager, Upshur County Superintendent, concerning the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board appointment of Carl R. Martin. Mr. Martin will be serving the term vacated by the resignation of Dr. Tammy Samples. His term will expire June 30, 2015. Agenda and/or notices of meetings as listed, meeting minutes as listed, meetings as listed, appointments needed or upcoming as listed. The Commission approved all invoices for payment. The Commission approved all vacation orders. The Commission approved the following settlements as listed. The Commission approved the following requests for time out of office as listed. At 9:15 a.m., Buck Edwards was scheduled to appear before the Commission. Mr. Edwards was not present, and thus the Commission recessed at 9:15 a.m. At 9:30 a.m., the Commission reconvened. Andrew Nelson, Upshur County EMS, appeared before the Commission and requested the approval of the administration of the Homeland Security Grant for the purchase of portable SIRN radios in the amount of $17,500. After discussion, on motion by Donnie Tenney, seconded by Troy Brady, the Commission approved and authorized the President to sign the grant application. The Commission recessed at 9:40 a.m. At 1 p.m., the Commission reconvened and attended the Board of Assessment Appeals hearing. Dennis Berry appeared before the Commission and requested relief from a current property assessment. After discussion, the Commission denied the request for relief based on insufficient evidence and convincing facts relating to inaccurate appraisal. With no further business, on motion by Donnie Tenney, seconded by Troy Brady, the Commission adjourned at 1:45 p.m.
Thank you very much, Tony. Is there a motion to correct or to approve the minutes as read? Corrections or additions?
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, motion carries. Our first appointment at 9:15 had been scheduled. Mr. Doss from the city of Buchanan. That meeting has been canceled, as I understand it. So we have our next...
They, actually, how they wanted that, us to handle is us to just discuss it with you and
so then make a further decision. You next then have an appointment at 9:30. So up until that point, we'll review some other items for discussion, action, and approval. Approval and signature of letter to West Virginia Association of Counties providing explanation of elected officials' membership. I think that is a document here that all three commissioners will sign. But for the record, though we are not going to maintain ourselves as members of the Association of Counties, I would, for the record, indicate that our administrator and assistant administrator will be authorized to participate in conferences as necessary and some of the meetings that are necessary for the performance of their duties. So with that on the record, anyone else have any comments other than that?
No, I just move we approve it.
Okay, then all in favor of that motion, or is there a motion to approve the signatures? Authorizing the signatures?
I made the motion. But
Okay,
second.
second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, motion carries. Approval of early voting workers for the November 4, 2014 general election. There's a listing of names there provided to us by Debbie Thacker Wolfram, Upshur County Clerk. Those individuals will be temporary, starting October 22nd, ending November 1, at the rate of $7.25 per hour. I have a motion to approve those individuals as workers for the general election.
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries, same. Motion carries. Okay. Next, we have approval request to release excess collateral held by J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. And what we are authorizing is that the bank can remove collateral in the amount of a market value of roughly $2.5 million. Since it is excess collateral, the motion to approve that request.
You might want to explain just exactly.
well, and that's on like the receiver accounts, like if there's been estates that don't know who the heirs are or whatever, and Steve Nanders has been the attorney, he has most of that in CD funds. And when Steve and I reviewed the information that Chase had sent, like millions in excess of what is needed for the amounts that are in those accounts, and what they do, and they've asked us to do, is if new funds get added to those accounts, to let them know, and they will adjust the collateral to make sure it's always covered. But I guess under the new banking regulations, they needed to do something because this was way more collateral than necessary for the funds.
Okay, is there a motion to approve that release?
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, motion carries. Next, we have approval of Lewis Upshur Animal Control Facility volunteer Jessica McCarthy. Is there approval for her to be, motion for her to be approved for this position?
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Following down for your information items, we have the monthly cat report from the animal shelter. We have invitation for Tigers Valley Conservation District to attend the 7th Annual Legislative Dinner, October 30th, at the Chapel Hill United Methodist Church. We have agendas and notice of meetings for a number of organizations and boards. And we have meetings of minutes, I should say, meetings, a list of meetings. Our next regular meeting of the Upshur County Commission will be on October 30. We will not be meeting as a commission next week, as that we are participating in a 10-county exercise with the Office of Emergency Management. So the commissioners will be at that location of the Office of Emergency Management, along with our administrators, to oversee the exercise, which is This year it's called Appalachian Drought, which would relate to a water shortage throughout the 10-county area, and how we as county officials, in conjunction with other agencies on state and federal level, would deal with such a emergency. Maybe next year will be something dealing with diseases such as Ebola or other activities. Hopefully that will be passed. But these exercises are held in order to prepare our emergency services for such an event. And in the event, those of you who recall, we had a derecho a couple of years ago, followed shortly thereafter by Hurricane Sandy, which created 2 emergency situations in our county, and throughout the state for that matter. So it's always important that we have our emergency services in a position to respond appropriately. And the citizens need to be aware of steps they can take to protect themselves as well. So as again, we will not be meeting next Thursday in open session, but rather will be at the emergency services building. And also elected officials will have their photographs taken October 17th, 2014. That's for posterity. Well, we have our next meeting in 20 minutes. That'll be Mr. Garvin regarding a request for supportive legislation. So until that time, we'll be in recess.
You might want to talk about the Senate Bill 373, maybe at the Michael Doss was.
Yeah, like at 9, I guess at 9:15. He said it was unlikely he was unable to
Okay.
attend, so
So
yes,
we'll give him an opportunity.
he may not attend, and then we can say what they're asking.
We will stand in recess until 9:30. We will resume our deliberations out of recess. We now, in 5 minutes, we'll have our first person presenting an issue. We have a comment or statement by our county administrator relative to a previously scheduled appearance by a city representative.
Yes, we've been contacted by Tom Landis, who is the manager of the city water treatment plant. And we had initially put him on the agenda to be here today and to address the Senate bill that requires the water treatment plant to establish a source water protection committee and a variety of other requirements they have, but that's one of the things they're required to put in place. And Mr. Doss was going to try that. Mr. Landis was unable to appear, then Mr. Doss was going to try to appear in his place, and then notified us he would not be able to be here today as well. So what they've asked is that the commission appoint representatives, and they would like one each from our public service districts to be on this committee, and then to appoint one county government representative to serve on this source water protection committee.
What exactly is the function of that? Do we know for sure?
You know, I don't know all of the details of that. I know it's something that they're required to do, and they're, as I understand it, their goal, this was all came into play based upon the issues that arose in Charleston. So I think it's to make sure they're setting up various protections and those sort of things are in place to try and prevent anything from that happening anywhere else.
Perform an oversight of the regulations that have been established by the state legislature.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I just know this committee's.
We have in our audience here, Mr. James Ferry, who is our Director of Office of Emergency Management. I know that we've discussed that at various meetings in your office related to this. We had kind of an initial meeting a couple of weeks ago, and this was presented to us by Mr. Landis. Would you like to comment on it?
Well, basically, they have to develop a plan. That committee has to develop a plan, and then they have to monitor how that plan functions, and so that's the main purpose of this.
This is just initial phase, identifying those individuals that would serve on the committee to oversee the implementation of the legislation. Any other comments?
Yeah.
Mr. Edwards, who is recorder of the city of Buchanan.
And recorder for the county
And
commission.
recorder for the county commission as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, since Tom and Michael couldn't be here, I can go ahead and explain some of this. Of course, with SB 373, we are now required to, the city and anything that has to do with our water, source water, even our river, we are now required to fulfill certain benchmarks by a certain time frame. One of those is that we have to have this source water protection committee initiated by, hopefully, the water department would like to have it done by the end of December, so we can start by the end of 2015 having the source water protection committee. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a choice. This is another one of those mandates coming down from Charleston that we have to fulfill. Now, I understand it, and I know you understand the importance of our water and our protection. What we're looking as far as the city is concerned is about a 7-mile stretch along the Buchanan River. In particular with this, we're talking about our in-source water that goes into the plant from the river. It's really important that we have this established by the end, at least have a committee established by the end of December so we can begin the process at the beginning of January. We already have some of the positions filled, but we definitely need from each of the PSCs so that we have, as a county-wide plan, a way to address any issues that come up from either of our water tanks, any of our chemical plant, or any of our chemical tanks that are out there. They'll be doing inspections. They'll be, as far as right now, we had to have all of our water tanks inspected by the beginning of this month, which is now done. Now we have to get an engineer certification and so on and so forth. It's a really long process. This is the initiating stage of it through our water treatment plant, and that's why we've come before you to ask for not only one representative from you, but also from each of the water districts.
Thank you.
Does that help fulfill?
Thank you, Mr.
Oh,
Appreciate it.
thank you.
Any comments by the commissioners? I would suggest we just hold this in advance in terms of making appointments, determine who would best fill a position for
At some point, need to contact their PSDs.
Correct.
I assume Mount Hope Water also for recommendations from them.
There is another PSD that we, I think, emergency management identified very small number.
Yeah, Grand Badger, I think it's called, but I think from what I understand, they may be assumed by Adrian. I'm not sure. That's rumor right now.
We will get back to the city
Do
on
you want us to
that.
send a letter to the PSDs to ask them to select someone from
I
there?
think that would be the beginning point.
And we have them, and then you all decide amongst you who will.
Yeah.
Do you want to make a decision on who's going to represent the commission?
Now, does it require a commission member or someone that the county commission appoints?
It would be best if it were a commission member, so that way it'd be a representative of the entire governmental body. There's no specific on having a county commissioner, because it could actually be the county administrator or the assistant administrator. It's just whoever is going to be overseeing on behalf of the county in this plan.
I don't know if we have to make that decision immediately.
No, actually, this is just for your information. We'd like to get the ball rolling. Like I said, our deadline to have this done is, we'd like to have it done by mid-December. But the benchmark is at the end of December. By the beginning of 2015, we have this going to be established and working.
Very good. Well, thank you, Mr. Evans. It is now 9:30, and we have a representative, Mr. Steve Garvin, to appear before the commission to request support for legislation tracking mobile tanks carrying fluids produced from drilling in the oil and gas industry. Mr. Garvin.
Commissioners, thank you for your time. The Freedom Tanks bill opened up a lot of doors as far as how easy our water sources could be contaminated. We've got a new industry in the state. We call it new technology called horizontal drilling. The process of new technology manufactures a lot of wastewater that our DEP is considered to have pollutants of concern. And these millions of gallons of this wastewater are traveling our highways in little tanks. We've all seen them. They have freshwater, residual waste, or brine. The problem is the EPA has classified this as special waste, and there's not any placards on the side of the truck. It could be something as toxic as condensate traveling in these trucks. It could be a lot of the other toxins that comes from Marcellus Shale, and we have no way to identify it. My solution to this is to go to the legislature this year and ask them to either make an amendment to the Marcellus Shale bill or also the tank bill possibly, where it would be required that a red dye or a similar dye would be added at the horizontal well location prior to the mobile tanks taking the fluid and leaving. That way, if there's an accidental spill, if there's illegal dumping, or the vehicle accident with the mobile tanks, then first responders and law enforcement want to immediately know this isn't fresh water. Because right now, it's just a point in time, when you look at these tanks, you don't know what's in them. So it's just a visual marker, basically to let us know that this is wastewater from a horizontal shale. And I'm asking for your support. I supplied them letters from the Clarksville Water Board. They're very concerned. Harrison County Commission is very concerned. And we had a situation, I don't know if people in Upshur County experienced it or not, but our sewage plants were taking this shale water and trying to treat it. And they found out very quickly that it was passing through the plants and going into the water supply. So they stopped that. So I'm here today to ask for a support letter from you, and I can take the Charleston.
And you're attending various meetings throughout the commissions and city council
Yes.
meetings?
Yes, I am.
Requesting support for this legislation?
Yes, I was previous down in Lewis
Or
County.
proposed legislation?
Right, but it's down in Lewis County a week and a half ago. I'll be going down to Doddridge County, Ritchie, and then I'll be going to Marion County in Milan. And I'll also be visiting with your local water utility and ask them also for letter of support, because we need to have some kind of a visual marker, because this is a really toxic soup, that's coming out of the shell. And it's very easily done. The well tender's on the site, he monitors the tank. As the tank's empty, it's just basically adding the dye to the tank before it's loaded into the total tank. It's a very cost-effective process that protects us all. You talked about an emergency meeting coming up. Now, Upshur County may be different, but Harrison County has no hazmat crew or anyone trained in that. Neither does Lewis County. I don't know if Upshur County does or not. But
At this point, do not.
Harrison County does, that's where the regional response team's located.
I was talking with Paul Bump, and he said that basically they don't have what would be necessary when it comes down to this kind of exposure to these chemicals. I'll check with him again and ask him.
Yeah, they have a regional response team that's a hazmat response team, because that covers Upshur County as well,
I
and
think
Lewis.
he was telling me they were on, was it Ryan, Environmental Service?
Well, you have two issues you're talking about. One is a response agency, and the other would be an actual cleanup crew.
Right.
So the regional response team is the initial response unit.
Okay.
That'll start the initial mitigation, and then they might have to bring up a cleanup crew, which could be Ryan, or whoever they contract with to actually do the cleanup.
Yeah. The reason that the conversation came up with Paul is because originally I wanted a local county representative to basically collect the sample, and I'd be responsible for sending it off to the lab for chemical analysis. And that's when we got into the discussion on what they could do, couldn't do. And that's probably another part I failed to mention is that when there is any kind of a vehicle accident or an accidental spill or leak dumping, is the samples to be collected and sent to a lab for verification of the chemicals in it, so that law enforcement, first responders and all personnel from the ambulance drivers here to the hospital will know exactly what they've been exposed to in case there's any problems. Because we've got some things called T-norms that's coming up with the Marcellus Shale, and these wells get older, the produced water actually produces more of these radioactive materials and becomes a heavier mix. I don't know if you recall that in Harrison County, it's been a couple months ago, there was a company up in PA that basically had some of these T-norms for their drilling mud. They tried to send it to a landfill up there, and they had the radiation monitors on the landfill. They rejected it. We had the wall, but we didn't have the monitors in Harrison County, and they sent it down to Harrison County, basically just to kind of take advantage of the system at that point. And I think they dumped about 12 tons of this into that landfill before they were stopped. Because it's very expensive to get rid of this stuff. It's just not something a municipal landfill will need. So any support would be greatly appreciated.
Now, you're saying that there's no identification on trucks that they're hauling?
Now, not on the shale water itself. We see them as, the industry calls them the water bottles, basically, and you'll see residual waste, you'll see fresh water, you'll see brine, but basically that's all falls under the classification of special waste. And the DEP, when we run into the sewage incident, they did a list of pollutions of concern that I believe I supplied you previously, of what's in the shale water. Now, if you're thinking of conventional wells and you have the oil tank going out to collect the oil truck going out to collect the oil, you'll notice they have the chemical placards, because of what they're hauling. That's required. But all these millions of gallons of shale water, they're not required to.
But are those chemicals known to the public? And somewhere there has to be, I think, public, and we have Dennis Alexander with this morning that's in the oil and gas industry, and maybe he can help clarify some of these, but it seems like, I know, and Jim, some of your all's activities, you've monitored everything going up and down the highways by the placards on them. Excuse me. It seemed to me like that in some of our meetings and discussions that what's in there, maybe the proprietary mix and all that.
No, he's talking about produced water, not what you haul out the frac. That's not what he's talking about, something different.
Yeah, this is, you're correct on fracking chemicals, they are proprietary. But once it goes down home and comes back up, that's a totally different animal at that point. And this
So you're
shale,
saying there's things that's in the ground that's toxic?
well,
Not what they're
basically,
putting in is toxic, but what's in the ground that's coming out.
well, I can't say what's going in because that's proprietary information.
Well, I know, but I think the list of ingredients are available.
I'm not aware, I mean, the DEP has tried to identify it, and I supplied that document to you as far as pollutants are concerned. But there's been other discoveries along the way. Basically, New York State has tested flowback water from this Marcellus Shale from West Virginia and from PA. And there's a chemical called 4-NQO that's kind of the surface that Charleston is at, hadn't already gone this several weeks back. And basically, they've tested the shale, they've tested the fracking chemicals. It's not an either one, so the assumption right now that that's being made in the fracking process and it's coming back up with the produced water. But as far as what's coming back in the produced water, the producers are not required in any way to do any kind of a chemical analysis of that. It basically just goes to disposal. The only thing I'm aware of that you're required to do is to check the irrigation level, and so whether it's qualified to go to master landfill. Does that answer your question, Natalie?
Is there any public comment? Or any
I'd
additional-
love to comment.
Well, I think you have the right to stand up there and comment.
Well,
Why don't you stand up to the podium, Dennis, so I can see your face?
for starters, he's confusing a couple of issues. And I can see that you may be slightly confused. When we transport fluids, they basically fall into three categories. When you fracture a well, yes, you have to haul whatever you're going to use out there. As you know, 99.5% of what we use to frack with is water. Good old water that they haul from the river or wherever they get it from. So you're looking at 0.5% is what these other chemicals are. And I don't think that he's asking those to be placarded they're well known. You can go online and see what those chemicals are. The Horizontal Well Act, here we are going in, we're going to put another law on the books when there's already one there. The Horizontal Well Act requires us to disclose what they're using to frack with. And most of the companies are doing it voluntarily and posting it on the internet right now. All of the vehicles that go down the road have to have an MSDS sheet, material safety data sheet, that disclose what's in it. So if a truck would wreck, you can go to that MSDS sheet and see what's exactly in that truck. That's been going on for quite some time. So that's one category, and I don't think that's that's not what they're seeking to regulate. That's already regulated. The second category is twofold. When you fracture a well, you pump all the water down the well, whatever comes back out, we generally call frac fluid. And that's that's the second category of water. The third category of water is after the well's been producing for some time, these wells make, as you know, Donnie, salt water. Salt water is produced. All the old Benson wells in Upshur County make salt water, and these Marcellus wells make salt water too. The water is saltier because it's deeper. You know, the salt content is somewhat higher on a Marcellus well than it is on a Benson well. So that's a third category of water. Whatever's produced, or not water, fluid that comes out. This is produced water. So whatever comes out of that well is separated. You remember, Donnie, when you were well tending, whatever went in the tank, some was water, some was oil, you hauled it all away, and the company separated it out. It's the same thing today from a long time producing Marcellus shale oil. Now, the second category we talked about is when you frack the well and flow it back, what happens to that water? Well, now there's less and less of that water now, because what they're doing, they're building these big pads where they drill multiple wells, and they reuse that water over and over again. So there's less of it being trucked down the highway today than there was 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, because the water is being reused. The frack water that they recover when they initially frack, instead of being hauled away after the frack, it's treated, recycled, and reused on the next well. And what they do is they dilute it, because not all the water comes back. So what they get back out, they dilute with new fresh water and use it on the next one. They just keep doing that. So that's less and less of a problem. Now, the production water, you know, from a well that's 5 years old that comes out of the ground, that is hauled away. That is placarded, generally placarded as brine water. And if you go back to look again at the Horizontal Well Act, and I said the Horizontal Well Act requires you to disclose, there's a method under the Horizontal Well Act so first responders can know what's in that, the frack what you're fracking down the well. But the Horizontal Well Act also has a very, very detailed chain of custody requirement. Whenever water or fluid of any kind is moved to and from a gas well location, it's just like a chain of evidence, so chain of custody of evidence. It's got to be documented, and you know what every truck picked up, where they went, what they had, what they were hauling. That's all very detailed. Now, they haven't done a chemical analysis. They can't tell you specifically what it is, but they can tell you generally what it is. But you know, in West Virginia, Charleston, West Virginia is the biggest chemical center east of Mississippi. And you see trucks going up and down the road all the time, and you know what's in them generally, but they don't put dye in them. They don't dye those chemicals so people know what's in them. You know, what is the incidence of problems? I mean, where have we had problems with trucks spilling? I'm not aware of that. And I bristle when I hear a reference to the Freedom Industries problem in Charleston last January, February. That had nothing whatsoever to do with the oil and gas industry. Nothing. It had to do with a failure of some tanks, but they weren't oil and gas tanks, and they weren't the oil and gas industry. And why we would use that as justification to pass yet another law is beyond me. I mean, the bottom line of all this is, for the last 9 or 10 years, the Chicken Littles extremists have been running around telling us the sky is falling. And here we are 10 years later, and nothing's happened. The industry continues to improve on its safety. It's using less and less water because it's recycling water. There have not been any instances or occurrences that I'm aware of that would warrant something like this. And the Horizontal Well Act already addresses a lot of what he's asking. So I just don't see the need for us to go and pass yet additional duplicative legislation when it's already on the books and it's already working, and you don't hear news reports of problems with water trucks on the road hauling fluid. It's just not happened, and the safeguards are already in place in case it does happen.
Into the chemicals, this variety of chemicals that have been identified, are they hazardous to human beings?
No.
If a human being is exposed to them in some manner, are they hazardous to the health and safety of a human being?
Two different types of chemicals. Okay, the stuff that they're hauling out there, by and large, the stuff that they're using to frack, by and large, is not harmful. Most of that stuff you can find in your house. For example, one of the things we use is guar, because we're pumping large volumes of water down a 5.5-inch pipe, 8,000 feet down and 10,000 feet out, almost 3 miles, right, over 3 miles. So they have to have friction problems. So guar, if you've ever made homemade ice cream and you crank and you crank and you crank and you never quite get it solid, and then you go to the store and your ice cream's solid, what they use to make that ice cream solid is guar, the same exact thing that we're using to slick that pipe up. And some of the other things, most of what we use to frack, you can find around your house someplace.
But
Now,
chemicals that would be injurious, I mean, there's things, I'm not taking a position here, but I'm just trying to, from my background being a deductive type individual, even chemicals around your house that are commonplace can be hazardous to a human being.
they can be, but they're such small volumes, it's inconsequential. But in fairness, what I will say is that he's correct on one score. You pump this fluid down the hole, most of which is not toxic, you know. And by the way, the industry is working more and more on getting biodegradable things that they can use. We're experimenting with that all the time. But there have been situations, not consistent, random samplings where you pump things down, some of the water that comes back, the initial frack water, has had some traces of barium in it. Now, barium obviously is a toxic chemical, and it's random and it's small volumes, and that has had to be treated. So that it can be a problem. But that doesn't happen after the well's fracked and flowed back. That water you get in that third category is generally just brine. Now it tends to be saltier than what you see in the shallower wells, but it's just salt water. And you know, in most cases, if you would have a truckload, which 80-barrel truckload would go down the road and leak salt water, yeah, it would kill the grass and it would kill some things, but once it got to a river or something, it'd be so diluted it would not be a major health hazard. So I think this is overreaching. It's not necessary. There's certainly Freedom Industries. There's no reason for us to take these kind of measures because it's totally unrelated to the oil and gas industry.
Thank you, Dennis. Do I have Mr. Faraday?
Just a couple of comments, if you will. I'm not really concerned about what he's calling produced fluids. I have some concerns personally, but one of the biggest concerns we have is the brine. Now, everybody says it's salt water. Well, from experiences that we've had locally, it also contains petroleum hydrocarbons, and it is volatile. The recycling unit they had over at Key Energy exploded 2 years ago because lightning struck it. So we've been concerned about brine water for some time. We've talked about it at the state level. So far, nothing's been done. But I'm concerned that some of those trucks, all they have is a label on the side that says brine water. I'm not so sure if they all have that on or not. That's a concern because that has a tendency to be explosive. If it's involved in an accident, you could have an issue. So we're concerned from an emergency management perspective in the LEPC about brine water. As far as the
But it's never happened.
well, the one blew right up over here at Key Energy when lightning hit it, so it's
A truck going down the road, blew
No,
up.
this was a recycling center that had brine water. So if it's in the truck, you know, I understand what you're saying, but I'm one of those people that I'm not going to wait till somebody gets killed to deal with it. If it's an issue, I'm going to deal with it now. And I understand where you're coming from, but you have to understand where we're coming from.
Tim,
as well.
what's your, as far as your concern with hauling brine, salt water down the road, what's your concern, what's the solution to deal with
Well,
that concern?
I think, I'll be honest with you, I think it needs to be regulated and it has to be placarded. And I think there has to be some amendments made that there's a placard that specifically identifies it as brine water, and the fact that it has the potential to be volatile. Maybe it's not always that way, but you don't know which one load may have more petroleums in it than another one did. So I'm not sure how that works, but some have more in than others. So we're concerned about, maybe it hasn't happened, but it never blew up before until the one at Key Energy blew up. So that says, yeah,
Now,
it can be volatile.
Was the tank at Key Energy, was it strictly brine or had hydrocarbons in it before?
Well, it's brine water that they were bringing back,
Right.
and they were trying to set up their own recycling system, which I really commend them for that. But when it had an electrical charge, it was volatile and it exploded.
But Key Energy also hauls crude oil, so they could have had some stuff mixed up in that, and that could have been the basis for it.
Was there an investigation as to
We
the
can't.
cause of the?
I can't verify that or not verify it. This is a concern that I'm expressing to you as your emergency manager and as your LEPC chair, and I think some of the LEPCs and emergency managers in the area have the same concern because we've discussed it at length.
And would you explain for the audience what OAPC?
The Local Emergency Planning Committee and the local emergency planning committees are charged with planning for chemical emergencies in your county.
Maybe one thing to do there would be to take samples of the brine and see how explosive it is, the brine itself.
I mean,
Could that test be done somehow?
I suppose somebody could do it. We don't have the ability to do that. Maybe we could get
Maybe the
DEC
state
to work
has
with
the
us.
ability to take samples of brine and salt water and see how explosive it is, and then that way it would help you be able to address that. But if it says brine on the truck and you see several of them, are you saying that you know there's some trucks that are hauling brine that's not labeled as brine?
I don't know that.
Okay.
I don't know that because some of the water trucks have brine labels on, some don't.
Well,
That's
some-
because
you
some
know,
of the
then-
water trucks are hauling fresh water, they're
Well,
not hauling
then they
brine.
ought to say potable water or fresh water. I mean, it's just, I don't think it's specific enough. That's my opinion. And the only other concern I have is, you know, we've looked at the MSDs for the frac fluids, and technically, they're not hazardous. In my opinion, some are borderline, but they don't meet the requirement. The concern I have, though, is you have a facility in town here right now that is mixing frac fluids, and they're being brought in by the tank car load. The volume is what concerns me. It may not be hazardous, but if, you know, a $25,000 or $30,000 gallon tank car rolls over in the river, whether it's hazardous or not, it's gonna mess up your water purification system. But those cars are going up and down the railroad right now. There's probably 5 or 6 parked over here, the old coastal lumber. They're not placarded because they're not considered hazardous.
Oh, wouldn't that
But
be
in that
something?
volume, you could have, if there's 5 of them over there, there's over 100,000 gallons of that fluid that gets taken inside and mixed. We went over to observe the offloading process. Pretty haphazard. The mixing process was haphazard, so we had to get DP involved in it. So they have to modify the way they're offloading, they have to modify the way they're mixing because they had no containment in that facility, which is only about 500 yards from the river. So there's some issues.
Even though it's considered non-toxic, you still have
It's
to have-
considered by OSHA standards non-hazardous.
But they still have to.
But if you read, and the ingredients, there's only small ingredients in these mixes, but if I'm concerned about volume.
I guess, of course, today the presentation by Mr. Garvin is that there be some dye attached to these wastewaters in order to alert emergency crews as to whether or not there's something that they should be concerned about if they arrive. And I take Dennis, you know, his observations relative to there have been no accidents at this point that I'm aware of, or that he's aware of, involving these trucks. I would suspect that Mr. Garvin is acting out, and I can't speak for you, I'll let you speak now for yourself. I'm just assuming, we know what happens when you assume, but I'm just, from what you've stated, that your concern is for a potential problem to arise.
Well,
So out of abundance of precaution, you would recommend some dye be placed in the water.
Well, I think if you recall what it was about.
You want to, can you hear?
yeah, we're fine. Good.
Yeah.
Are you good? Okay. I think if you recall, about 3 weeks ago down in Braxton County, basically there was a tanker truck that wrecked by the Elk River. And there was a great concern that it's going to get in the river and they're going to have to shut the valves on again down at American Water. So this has occurred over in Ohio this week. There was a tanker truck hauling condensate that wrecked into a stream. It was in the middle of the night. First responders were scared to fool with it. They stayed clear away from it until daylight hit. And then they went in and I think it was, 1,100 homes they turned the electricity off to because they didn't know how volatile the compound was. There have been accidents and there are accidents. As far as the chemicals, the DEP's already clearly stated that all the sewage treatment plants, basically to have these chemicals that are in this flow back water. If you remember, I believe I gave you a copy of this and the information I left you. In the June 9th letter, they clearly say these are the pollutants that the sewage boards had to check for before they run it through their plant. And I mean, you're talking about things like arsenic, you're talking about chromium, you're talking about hexavalent chromium, you're talking about cyanide, you're talking about mercury. This is our West Virginia DEP's list of what's in these wastewaters coming back from the Marcellus shale wells. So to say an accident hasn't happened, it has happened. And basically what it is for first responders, they need to know what they're dealing with, because these trucks are not going to be placarded, because that's going to take federal regulations, because they were given a spatial exemption. The oil and gas industry secured a spatial exemption for that. And when you're talking conventional wells, still horizontal well, you know, we're talking apples and oranges here. I mean, you had a load of oil that your oil truck was coming to get, it was placarded, and you might have had, if you had a good oil well, you might have only had 2 or 3 barrels of salt water you had to pay for. But that's not what we're talking about now. We're talking about a horizontal boreling through a shale on a sand that has known contaminants in it that's coming back to the surface. We have T-norms that are going to be a greater concern to water utility boards because they have no way to test for them. There's not a facility in the state that can test the radiation level in the drinking water. And that's coming from American Water. And that has to be sent out of state. It's a very lengthy process. So if you have a situation, talking to the one of the public relations people at American Water, their greatest nightmare because of their experiences is if a tank would roll off of 79 down there in Lewis County and up down there above their water intake. Because she relayed to me they've had 2 separate instances, one in Huntington and one in PA, where they had situations where this flowback water got into the water in streams, and it took their attorneys to get the chemical analysis of what they thought might have been in that tank. So this is something that's occurred. Additionally, when you talk about the freedom tank spill, I think the most important part of that spill is that that chemical had not had a licorice odor to it. If it had been odorless, colorless, and tasteless, like a lot of these chemicals West Virginia DEP has designated, how long would it taken to have been discovered? You know, would have been after a number of people who became ill or whatever. When it comes down to the chemical trucks running down in 79, 77, anywhere in this country, they have the placards on the side of the tank, just like when your oil pickup tank came. But the oil and gas industry secured this spatial waste classification so that they wouldn't have to placard these trucks. But that was back during conventional days. I mean, how much brine was going made from a conventional well? I mean, now we're talking about millions of gallons. Now, the state of West Virginia, I've not been able to find any references, but the PADEP says right now there's over 9 million gallons of this flowback water, produce water, being transported on their roads up there. And they're expecting that to increase to 20 million gallons by 2016. Now, we're just in the infancy of this boom, and it's going to get big, and I support the industry. Probably not find a stronger supporter, but our water is critical. And what happens is these companies, I've personal witnesses, they hire contractors, and the contractors are given the responsibility to do certain jobs, then they're in here and out, they're not local. Okay, so if they do the right job, we're good. But if they don't do the right job, then we've got a mess to clean up. And our water system is something that we just cannot play around with. And this is a simple fix. I mean, we're talking about a red dot.
But the situation you were talking about in Ohio, where there was a spill,
Yes.
did that go in the river?
Yes.
It did go in the river?
Yeah.
So what would the red dye have done to help those first responders?
Well, the red dye at that point in time probably would have just shown how far it went downstream.
Right.
Okay, down in Braxton County, that's more of a local example. You know, here was this tanker truck, this spill next to the Elk River, and the DEP says, well, we don't believe it, don't turn your valves off American Water, we don't believe it got in the water, is basically what they were told. So they didn't know for sure, and these chemicals are designed to penetrate. I mean, that's why they use them, they're designed to penetrate rock, dirt, whatever. Okay, secondly, on that particular spill in Braxton County, what about the cleanup? When did they know? They brought a hoe in there and they were cleaning up from where it spilled. When did they know to stop cleaning? Then we're talking about a clear fluid here. They assumed that they got all of it. If there's red dye, they would have known they got all of it. Or green dye or purple dye, whatever the dye is. The only thing to die for is just a safety. It's a health and safety issue that we're saying, hey, look, if we see this red dye, we know it has the potential to have a lot of toxic stuff in it. We know it has to be cleaned up properly. And another instance, when you talk about getting into this was over in Ohio, I believe. No, this was PA. Local borough this week, sewage treatment plant shut down. Okay, well, they traced it back to somebody dumped approximately 3,000 to 4,000 gallons of produced water in the storm sewer. They're trying to find out where the dumping point was so that they could stop it again. Now, there was a dye in that fluid, they wouldn't have to question where the dumping point was. And this is, this has been in the news. So this is going on now. So, what I'm saying is, and what I'm more concerned about, is you have an accident out here on the interstate, and you have one of these trucks. And you have Good Samaritans, you have law enforcement, you have first responders, you have the ambulance personnel, you have emergency personnel in the hospital. They're being exposed to this. They have a right to know through a chemical analysis of what they've been exposed to. Because these chemicals that the DEP has already identified in this flow pipe wastewater are carcinogenic. They take months, years, whatever to develop. If someone's in an automobile accident, it's a red dye, they get the chemical analysis, and you give it to everybody who's in contact with it. If there's any concern, they can go to their physician, they can take this chemical analysis with them, they can have a blood and urine test to see how much exposure they actually have. And these T-norms, these radioactive materials, they lodge in our bones, and they get in there and they stay for a long time. Now, the concentration increases as these wells get older, and it comes in the brine. And that's where that concentration increases from the formation.
What level of radiation is in that water? What percent?
I didn't bring those figures with me. I mean, you could check the DEP on the incident down at the landfill down in Harrison County. Like I said, they have limits that these municipal landfills are allowed to carry. And we have that situation where a company, rather than paying the money to send it out west to an approved landfill, took advantage of our system of not having those radiation detectors on our municipal landfill, and they shipped it down here. And fortunately, somebody caught it, and they only dumped 12 tons of it. So, it's not something that hasn't happened. It's just trying to get ahead of the curve here a little bit and say, here's a real simple solution. Let's put a dye in it before it leaves the horizontal well site. If nothing happens, no chemical analysis needs to be made. But if an accident does occur, an accidental spill, or illegal dumping, then we know we need to test that and see what we're dealing with. That's my position on this. I'm not willing to cost the industry a bunch of money. I'm not trying to regulate the industry. I'm just trying to give us a visual marker for our health and safety.
I think we have a rebuttal from.
Yeah. On its face, this can't be right. For example, he's trying to tell you that the Marcellus Shale is different from the shallow wells we drill. It's all Devonian Shale. The Benson is part of the Devonian Shale. The Riley, the Speechley, all the formations we've been developing in West Virginia, Upshur County for 7,500 years are all part of the Devonian Shale. This is shale. It's not sand. The Benson's not sand. The Benson is shale. Is that not right? Okay. To say that, oh, this is Marcellus Shale, it's different? No, I'm afraid that's not the case. And, on any given day, what do you think there's more transported across our roads? Gasoline or frack water? Gasoline. Do we dye gasoline? No, we dye diesel fuels for farm use versus on the road, but we don't dye diesel fuel or gasoline that goes up and down our highways in much, much larger concentrations than what we do. And this notion that over time, the older a well is, the more toxic chemicals that it comes back in your flow water, is just not the case. I mean, there's no evidence that that's the case. So, again, we have rules about how water is moved and how we document every gallon of water that goes onto or leaves a gas well location. We're watching it closely. We know generally what it is. You're not going to ever be able to analyze every truckload before it moves down the highway. That's just not physically possible. So, you know, I think the industry's done a lot for safety, and I think it continues to do that. For example, trying to recycle water and not to number one, save hauling more fresh water in, and also to be moving wastewater on highways. They've done, the industry's dramatically increased the amount of water you see hauled around, and I think they'll continue to do that. They're also working on new ways to frack using liquid gases so they don't have to move water. I mean, it's getting better and better, but you know, the constant images of Freedom tanks and what's happening there, and some of this stuff is just beyond the pale. And I don't think that we need more laws and more regulations when there haven't been any incidents of major problems that we've seen. Certainly no health hazards have resulted as a result of anything.
Well, there's a process as far as proposals of legislation with the County Commission Association. What we do is recommendations like you're making is comes to the committee, and then they do the research and listen to both sides, and then they make recommendations that flow through that process so that everybody has both sides of the issues and understands exactly how, you know, what the pros and cons are of these issues. I do know, and I was going to ask that question about gasoline, Jim, and your all's study of what's the major thing, what's the number one volume that travels up and down the highway?
What we call flammables, which would include gasoline.
Gasoline and
Now
diesel.
that trend during the last flow study started to change.
Yeah.
We saw more corrosives than we've seen in the
But
past.
I do know, being involved with Mount Hope Water Association, that 1 gallon of gasoline will contaminate 100,000 gallons of water. So, you know, if 1 gallon of what you're talking about got in the Buchanan River above the intake, if 1 gallon of that got in, or 1 gallon of gasoline got in, that gasoline is going to contaminate 100,000 gallons of water.
You better put dye in it.
Well, I think the thing is on a gas tanker truck, it's placard. I mean, you know exactly what's in the truck. You know, you have that information. But on these mobile tanks, it's hauling the flow back, produced water, and condensate. There's no identification of what's in that tank.
So dye's not gonna help it.
The dye is going to give you a visual identification in case it gets out of that tank by whatever means. That someone's going to say, wait a minute, you know, that's not supposed to be there. You know we've got something here coming that could possibly have some really toxic stuff in it. And you also have to understand these mobile tanks are working with the DEP on a particular situation. These mobile tanks will go one moment, they'll pick up fresh water. They'll go to the next minute and they'll pick up some really nasty stuff. And there's no cleaning of the tanks. So to say that they might have fresh water with them, the next question the DEP posed to me was, when was the last time they hauled some residual waste or some toxic waste? And did they clean the truck out before they loaded up with fresh water? And there's a lot of things here, and this is why it needs to be a legislative process. Like you're saying, where the committees can get together, they can sit down, both sides can present their case. And I think the DEP's already pretty much identified what's in this flowback water. And that's why they stopped the sewage treatment plants from taking it in, because they couldn't keep these chemicals out of the rivers. You know, and what we're wanting to do here is just basically say, hey, look, just a visual marker. You know, so we know if something comes out of that fluid gets out of that tank, we know whether is it just pure fresh water. It might very well be. But is it flowback produced, is it toxic to human health?
Rick, I think you had raised your hand back there.
I'm just gonna say this as a citizen that's actually been relatively well educated on this in the last 4 to 5 months, particularly when it comes to our source water and the SB 373. I would encourage that perhaps the commission go ahead and support this, just so we can identify exactly what it is that are in these trucks. Now, we were talking about just earlier with Michael Doss and the Source Water Protection Act that we now have to be involved in. It would help us entirely, and I'm sure it would help the OEM, if there were anything that were down on the south side, because we're very unique with the Buchanan River, that runs north. A lot of our wells down in the south are accessible to the river. And we have to be able to identify whatever those chemicals are that are coming that way. Now, the dye would give us a better indication of the travel and where it's headed, so we are better protected. Because again, we only have one source of water in Upshur County. That is our river. It's the most important thing we have. I would suggest that also you take a look at the SB 373 and see exactly where these gentlemen are coming from, because it is supposed to protect our water in any kind of emergency we have. So I would be in support, I'm sure the city would be in support of the placards, the vehicles.
And you're saying the placards, not necessarily the dye?
Well, I can't say anything about the dye, as long as we can identify what that is, the material that's coming down. The dye would help us insofar as an emergency response from the water department as to where that water is going and how much time we have before it gets into our source water and how we can protect it the best. If not, then what do? We just sit there and we have to wait for the smell. If there is a smell, if there isn't a smell, we already have a plan in place, and the OEM also works with us in case there is such a spill down on the southern part of Upshur County and it heads that way. The closer you get, the less time we have to respond, and there's no way for us to be able to tell if there is, in the unfortunate incident that there is an accident and a tanker goes over. We've got to be able to have a way to identify it, and also a plan and process, which is part of the protection plan we're looking at with that committee, on how we're going to address that issue. Because if we lose the water plant, all of Upshur County and a couple of other counties are going to start losing water. That's what the whole point of the 373 is, SB 373.
But did I understand you to say that the list you had there, the DEP has already identified what's in that water?
Yes.
So that has been addressed. You can get a copy of that.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I bet we already have a lot of the information as far as our local plan goes.
So
And I know we work directly with the OEM on this.
So that's been addressed. Your concern as far as what's in the waters, he can tell you right there what it is.
Well, I'll tell you what, our plant operators, we've got some of the best in Buchanan, and you know our water is some of the cleanest. They do a lot of testing, and they have all the information that this gentleman has from the DEP. What we need is a way to identify and be able to correct any spills or incidents that may be headed down towards Buchanan and our water source. That's the important thing. Now, is there an issue with putting a placard on there? Is there an issue with just being able to identify or even add the dye? I don't see a problem with the dye. Unfortunately, if your gasoline goes in your water source into the river, that's not so hard to identify because you can easily smell it with the smell or with the licorice, for instance, with the incident down in Charleston. If you don't have that, though, then how are you going to be able to adjust or react to the emergency situation that you put yourself into? Does that make sense? And on the other end of that, we do have on the other part of the river, of course, our sewage plant. So we're not only attacking from one end, it goes down and goes into the next end, which is another issue in itself that we have to keep on top of. The city's trying very hard as the main source of the water, but we have to have other protections as well from the DEP and from the state. I don't want to have more mandates from the state. Gosh knows, we've got enough. But in this case, it actually is a good idea, and it could be an identifying source. Thank you.
Mr. Kimball wishes to comment.
99% of the trucks that haul water have a sign on the side. Not necessarily a sign, but it'll be painted on the side of the tank as to what is in that tank. Whether it is fresh water, potable water, residual waste, or brine water.
Other comments? Okay, the issue before us then is to whether or not Upshur County will support legislation tracking mobile tanks carrying fluids produced from drilling in oil and gas industry. So I ask, is there a motion to support such legislation?
Well, as I stated previously, there's a process that we follow with the County Commission Association on issues like this.
So you're recommending that he present?
I'm recommending that we present this issue and concern to the County Commission Association, the Board of Directors, and their legislative committee, that they do research on this, and look at both sides and come up with a recommended legislative issue to go to the legislature.
You
That's my
are,
recommendation.
and you are on the board, is that correct?
I'm on board.
Will you carry that recommendation?
We'll get there. If you'll write your concern, if you'll put it in writing,
Okay.
then we can, and if you'd like to, Dennis, if you would like to, upon his written recommendation, if you'd like to give us the other side of that coin, and I will make sure that goes to the County Commission, West Virginia County Commission Association Board of Directors and their legislative committee to look at that issue so they can start studying that. And I will, that would be my motion, that's the action we take.
Is there a second to that motion?
Yes, I'll second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
And I think we're all concerned about good, safe drinking water. At the same time, we're concerned about, the economy of the state of West Virginia.
When did your group meet?
The board meets monthly.
Well, I mean, the
The
commission,
issue-
you want to put this before the committee of commissioners? Is that-
Well, it can go, actually, they can meet, they meet by phone conference all the time. So
Oh,
it can go out to everyone to start the discussion process.
Our next scheduled meeting is at 1 o'clock this afternoon, supervisors meeting, followed by a 2 o'clock policy board meeting.
Well,
I
and
will reset this.
Mr. Jacobus and Mr. Whitehair came as members because of where we're at with the meetings. No decisions can be made on what they want to talk to you about, but they wanted to just kind of update you on some of the proposals they got for the grant. And the problem is the grant's due the last day of this month, and we don't meet until the 30th, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Bob had sent some information to Kelly.
We have
I
copies in
think
there.
she forwarded that.
Forwarded it, but
Everyone.
maybe just,
That's what I was going to ask, make sure everybody has a copy.
I'm going to.
Um, Bob had worked on this more than I have, but we basically tried to contact as many people as possible. Called neighboring counties who had systems already in place, whether it's splash park, indoor water slide, and try to get some vendors to get some more information for you to look into. But what we basically came up with and the responses that we got is in front of you, that Kelly just handed to you. We basically got a quote from 2 different companies, and Bob will correct me if I'm mistaken, but one of them is the individual who was here previously, probably 3 or 4 years ago, who gave a quote to you folks on the water slide and splash park up at the pool. So he came back, was familiar with what was trying to be done up there, and provided basically an updated cost. And that one is from Tom Nelson. So reference, I don't know if you have the emails, but the avalanche water slides.
Right.
Yes.
Kelly sent those out to you.
Yes, and then the other estimate that he provided is an estimate that he just prepared for the village of Barbersville in Cabell County. They are currently in the process of putting in a splash park, and gives you an idea of the cost and the amenities that they're putting in there, to have an idea what you're looking at as far as costs in regards to that. The other proposal that was obtained from us was somewhere out Midwest or something.
Kansas, but
Kansas.
they're the ones that did Clarksburg and Lewis
They're the ones that
County.
did, thank you, Clarksburg. So that's the other splash-tacular, I believe. That's the estimate from them. Couple things to keep in mind. As we mentioned previously, there's only 450,000 available. And based on the demand, they expect and I had mentioned this in other meetings, basically 1 grant of 100,000, which is a total project of 200, because you remember it's a 50/50 grant. And then they have basically 4 grants up to 30,000 each, and then 3 grants up to 60,000 each. So I believe with the estimates and information you have in front of you, we could easily put together a $200,000 project. Keep in mind some of the estimates, make sure you read the details in it, because there's some services that will have to be done, activities that will have to be done that's not included in the price quote, okay? So just make sure you look at those in detail so you know what you're looking at. And I don't think I have anything else, unless you have specific questions. I have been over in Lewis County for other things that our office has been working with them on, and I had asked them over there, how their admissions had, whether they dropped or basically were stable in the result of the new pool that they have there. And they basically said this last year they doubled as a result of the different amenities they have here at the pool. I believe their concessions tripled. So of the admissions that were throughout the year, I think half of those admissions participated, in other words, bought a stamp to ride the slides. So it gives you an idea of what your neighboring county, the kind of success they've had in putting a splash park or sliding. The gentleman, Tom Nelson, did mention, and Bob told me also, that he mentioned that it might be more expensive to put a splash park in than a slide. However, the long-term benefits are greater with the splash park than a slide. He says you seem to have more revenue come in with a splash park than a slide.
We'd have to have determine the footprint of work on the existing space that we have. I understand.
Mr. Nelson has visited the pool before, so he knows the area, so.
So did he look at the area where we have the children's wading pool? Was that area that's the splash?
That's originally like 3 or 4 years ago, that's the area we were discussing at that time, yeah.
But how was he intending, was that for just the splash area
Yes.
or for the slide?
That
Because
was
my
just-
concern with the slide one was it looked like it was dumping into basically what's our swim lanes right now.
I don't think he had a layout of actually where it's setting at the high school pool.
Because that was my concern with the slide. It looks like a great and a fun slide, but basically I wasn't certain we would still have swim lanes left because of where it was coming into.
Well, that's a decision that, if that's the slide you're wanting to go with, and obviously we'll have to put a layout to see exactly where it's going to set.
But there are, it's my understanding, there are options where the landing of the slide could be something other than going into the pool. Is that correct?
That is correct. For example, Lewis County actually has an individual, I'll say, pool area where folks
Kind of a
slide
landing
into.
area.
Yes.
Right, so it doesn't bother the pool?
No.
Is there room for that to be located though?
Again, it depends. For the bigger slide, I would imagine it'd have to shift back a little bit just from from my point of view, because it's such a big, long slide. I think the one from the company out in Kansas, that's a little more confined to a smaller area rather than spread out. I don't necessarily think that, I think they would probably be able to work in that area. Obviously, depending on what's underground over there, some things might have to be moved or what have you. So. But again, due to the time frame we're under, it gives you an idea of the cost of what one of these things might be for you to consider. So again, the applications are due 2 weeks from this Friday. We have it, basically some of the forms are already completed. However, there's additional information that has to be done in order to complete that and have time to submit it. So, I don't know what the plan would be from here till the end of the month, but.
Well, in the past, when we've had such a time constraints, we've had some special meetings, which if it's necessary, we could do that.
That'd be great. So we know how to proceed on your behalf.
Well, we can look over the information that you brought.
And then if you have questions, you know how to get hold of us. All right? Thanks, John.
Appreciate it. Is there any public comment? Any issues that's pending? If not, recess until 1 o'clock. We'll see you later.